believing that a uniform, a badge, and a piece of issued steel can shield you from the true darkness is the most dangerous lie ever whispered into the ear of a waking man. It is a child's prayer against the monster under the bed, a futile gesture in a house already consumed by shadow. I have seen the visions, felt the cold echoes that reverberate back from the abyss when mortal authority dares to stare into it. These aren't mere stories told to frighten recruits around a flickering precinct light. They are scars on reality, moments where the veil was not just lifted but torn to shreds, revealing the writhing, ancient things that live just on the other side. They are tales of dried blood that cries out from the concrete and of cracked mirrors in forgotten homes that show reflections of what should not be. Forget what you think you know about law and order. Tonight, we speak of the chaos that bleeds through the cracks. The first whisper that reached me was not of violence, but of displacement, a silence so profound it became a sound. Imagine two officers, their faces etched with the weary cynicism of 1,000 false alarms, rolling up to a suburban home. A domestic disturbance call. Neighbors heard shouting, then an abrupt, chilling quiet. The house itself seemed wrong. The paint was peeling like sunburned skin, the lawn a tangle of dead gray weeds, yet the address was correct. It was a tumor of decay in a street of manicured lawns. A crow sat on the roofline, a black shard of glass against the bruised twilight sky, watching them with an intelligence that was far older than the crumbling bricks it perched upon. That bird was a sentinel, a guardian of a threshold they were never meant to cross. They felt it before they understood it, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. They pushed the door, a creaking, groaning complaint from warped wood, and stepped from the world they knew into a place of cold ashes and memory. The air was thick, heavy with the dust of years, yet the call had been placed 10 minutes ago. Furniture was draped in white sheets, pale ghosts in the gloom, their forms suggesting a life abandoned long ago. The shouting the neighbors heard was impossible, but then they heard it, a whisper skittering from the upstairs darkness. A sound like dry leaves blowing across a grave. It was a woman's voice, humming a tune that was broken and dissonant, a melody that clawed at the edges of their sanity. They drew their weapons, the metallic click deafening in the dead air, and began to climb the stairs, each step a descent into a place where their authority was a meaningless joke. The upstairs hallway was a throat of darkness, punctuated by a single closed door at the far end, a splinter of pale light bleeding from beneath it. The humming grew louder, more intimate, as if the source was right beside their ears. It was a lullaby, but twisted into something predatory. They felt the walls breathing, the house itself a living organism observing their intrusion with a malevolent curiosity. The very geometry of the hall seemed to shift, stretching and contracting like a nightmare trying to find its shape. One officer reached for the doorknob, his hand trembling, the cold brass searing his skin like a brand. He knew, with a certainty that defied all logic and training, that opening that door was an act of profound and irreversible violation. He was about to look upon something that would break not just the case but him. This is where everything changes for you when you realize some doors are not meant to be opened. He turned the knob. The humming stopped. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was a physical force, pressing in on their eardrums, suffocating them. Beyond the door was not a bedroom, but a scene of impossible chronology. A young girl's room, pristine, from a bygone era, the 1950s. A rocking horse stood perfectly still, yet they felt the phantom motion of its ride. A doll with cracked porcelain skin sat on the bed, its glass eyes staring directly at them, filled with an ancient, cataracted hatred. And there, etched into the thick layer of dust on a vanity mirror, was a single word written in a frantic, childish scrawl: leave. It wasn't a request, it was an omen, a statement of inevitable doom. They saw no one, but they were not alone. The presence in that room was a weight, a pressure, the feeling of being watched by 1,000 unseen eyes from every shadow. They backed away, a slow, deliberate retreat, their training fighting against the primal urge to turn and flee. As they crossed the threshold out of the room, the door slammed shut with the force of an explosion, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the dead house. The humming began again, but this time it was different. It was distorted, deeper, interwoven with a low growl that was utterly inhuman. They stumbled down the stairs, bursting out of the front door and into the twilight, gasping for air that didn't taste of dust and despair. When they looked back, their hearts stopped. The house was gone. In its place stood an empty, overgrown lot, marked by the crumbling remains of a foundation, a place that had clearly been abandoned for decades. The neighbors stared from their perfect lawns, confusion on their faces, insisting the dilapidated house had stood there just moments before. What they had stepped into was not a building, but a scar, a memory trapped in a loop of misery, an echo of a tragedy so profound it had torn a hole in the fabric of the street. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. The badge they wore, the laws they enforced, were instruments of a world that was orderly, rational, and finite. They had blundered into a realm governed by grief and shadow, where time is a broken mirror, reflecting endless corridors of pain. The entity in that room, the whispering girl, was a prisoner of her own tragedy, and for a few terrifying moments, she had almost made them her cellmates. They filed a report that was a work of fiction, a lie to paper over a truth their minds could not fully process. But the humming, sometimes on quiet nights, they still hear it at the edge of hearing, a cold reminder of the door they should never have opened. Now, let us turn our gaze from a place that is wrong to a person who is hollow. There are men who walk this earth, who are little more than vessels. Their humanity, a thin veneer over a core of absolute nothingness. I speak of an interrogation room, a sterile box of cinder block and unforgiving fluorescent light. Detective Miller, a man who believed he had seen the absolute worst of human nature, sat across from a suspect in a series of ritualistic murders. The man was unremarkable, thin, pale, with eyes that were like stagnant pools of water. He hadn't spoken a word since his arrest. He just sat there, a portrait of unnerving calm. Miller began the usual dance, the well-worn script of questions and psychological pressure, but his words fell into a void. The suspect's placid expression never wavered. He wasn't resisting, he was simply absent. After an hour of this suffocating silence, Miller slammed his hand on the metal table, the sound a crack of thunder in the small room. "Say something," he roared, his frustration boiling over. The suspect blinked slowly, a languid, reptilian movement, and then he spoke. But the voice that came out was not his own. It was a chorus, a symphony of whispers, faint and overlapping, as if a dozen people were speaking at once from the back of his throat. The voice spoke of things it could not know. It described the recurring nightmare Miller had since childhood, the one with the creaking door and the shadow with no face. It whispered the name of his first love, a name he had not uttered aloud in 20 years. It was a violation of the deepest order, a psychic intrusion that stripped him bare. The chorus of voices then shifted, coalescing into a single, sibilant whisper that filled the room with a palpable cold. It spoke of the victims, not with remorse, but with a detached clinical interest, like a collector describing his specimens. It detailed their last moments, their final, terrified thoughts, their pleas to gods they had long forgotten. And then it did something that shattered the last of Miller's composure. It began to speak with the voice of Miller's own father, who had died on an operating table 10 years prior, whispering the last words he ever spoke, words that only Miller had heard. It was a crucifixion of the soul, a calculated act of spiritual terrorism. The man across the table was a cracked mirror, reflecting back every secret fear and buried grief Miller possessed, twisting them into weapons. Miller staggered back from the table, his chair screeching against the floor. He saw now that the man's eyes were not empty. They were doorways, and from those doorways something ancient and intelligence was looking out, studying him with an unholy curiosity. It wasn't a man he was interrogating. It was a hive, a host, a walking, breathing haunted house of stolen voices and consumed souls. The law had no framework for this. There was no charge for soul theft, no Miranda rights for the legion of whispers hiding behind a borrowed face. The creature wearing the suspect's skin smiled then, a subtle, chilling upward tick of the lips. It knew it had won. It had broken him not with fists, but with truths that should have remained buried. Miller fled the room, leaving the whispering man alone in the harsh light, a monarch on a throne of secrets. The official report would cite a psychotic break, a conveniently manufactured delusion, but Miller knew better. He had looked through a keyhole into a reality far more terrifying than any simple act of murder. He had seen the truth that some predators do not hunt for the body, but for the story, the memories, the very essence of a person. They are the crows of the spiritual world, picking over the carrion of human experience, adding voices to their choir. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt that no one was truly home, that you were speaking to a collection, an archive of stolen lives? The world is filled with these empty men, these whispering galleries walking in plain sight. Every soul that joins this channel feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness, a voice that warns you to be careful of whose eyes you meet. Let us now travel to a place of profound loneliness, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through an ocean of darkness. The midnight patrol on a deserted state highway. Officer Gaines was a creature of routine, of the comforting monotony of empty roads and the hypnotic hum of his engine. But this night was different. The air was heavy, pregnant with a storm that wouldn't break. He saw headlights approaching in his rearview mirror, which was strange. No one used this road after midnight. The car that overtook him was a phantom from another time, a pristine 1958 Plymouth Fury, blood red, its fins cutting the air like razors. It glided past him with an unnatural silence, its engine making no sound he could hear. It was a ghost ship on a sea of blacktop, and his instincts screamed that something was profoundly wrong. He flipped on his lights, the blue and red strobes painting the desolate landscape in frantic, garish colors. The Fury pulled over immediately, its brake lights glowing like dying embers. Gaines approached the driver's side, his hand resting on his sidearm, a film of cold sweat on his neck. The driver was a man, impeccably dressed in a suit that was decades out of style. His face was pale, almost translucent in the strobing lights, and his smile was a rictus of predatory charm. He held a lit cigarette, the cherry a single, malevolent red eye in the gloom. He asked, his voice smooth as silk but cold as a tombstone. The air around the car was frigid, a pocket of winter in the humid summer night. Gaines could see his own breath misting in the air. Gaines asked for license and registration. The man simply chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I don't believe in them," he said, his smile widening, showing teeth that were just a little too sharp. "They're part of a world I no longer subscribe to." Gaines felt a tremor of pure, primal fear. He peered into the car, and his blood ran cold. The interior was not that of a restored classic. It was rotted, decayed, covered in what looked like dried blood and patches of mold. The smell that wafted out was the cloying, sweet stench of decay, of forgotten flowers on a neglected grave. Yet the man before him was pristine, a stark, impossible contradiction. He was an illusion, a projection laid over a core of absolute rot. The man took a final drag from his cigarette, and its light flared, illuminating his eyes. They were completely black. No iris, no sclera, just two pits of infinite night. "You should get back in your car and forget you saw me," the man whispered, the sound now carrying the weight of an inescapable command. "This road, it has rules, and you are breaking them by being here now." Gaines found himself backing away, his feet moving without his consent. The man's smile never faltered. The Fury's engine suddenly roared to life, a deafening guttural sound that shook the very ground beneath Gaines's feet. It tore away from the shoulder, leaving behind a trail of what smelled like ozone and burnt sugar. Gaines stood frozen, watching the taillights disappear into the oppressive darkness. Shaken, he returned to his cruiser and ran the plate number he'd managed to memorize. The response from dispatch chilled him to the bone. The plate was registered to a 1958 Plymouth Fury. The car and its driver had been involved in a fatal fiery crash on this very stretch of highway in 1963. He was not the first. Dispatch records, old and archived, showed dozens of similar reports stretching back over 50 years. Officers, truckers, lone travelers, all describing the same blood-red car, the same pale, smiling man with black eyes. It was an echo, a wound in time that refused to heal. The highway itself was haunted, a place where a moment of violent death had been stamped onto reality, forced to replay itself for anyone unfortunate enough to be there at the wrong hour. What the stars don't tell you openly is that some places are hungry. They are saturated with pain and tragedy, and they develop an appetite. Officer Gaines never patrolled that road alone again. He understood that he was not an enforcer of the law there, but a trespasser in a dead man's territory, a ghost's kingdom of asphalt and memory. He had pulled over a legend, a piece of mobile, malevolent folklore. The darkness I speak of is not always found in lonely houses or on forgotten roads. Sometimes it is cataloged, tagged, and stored on a shelf in a climate-controlled room. It festers in the heart of the very places built to contain it. Consider the evidence locker of an old city precinct, a library of human misery, rapes, murders, suicides. Every box on every shelf contained an object saturated with pain, a relic of a final violent moment. Officer Brady, a man nearing retirement, was tasked with inventory. One rainy afternoon, he pulled a box from a cold case shelf, a murder from the 1970s that had never been solved. The victim was a young woman, believed to be the casualty of some occult ritual. Inside the box, among the faded photographs and brittle reports, was a small, hand-carved wooden idol. It was ugly, asymmetrical, and felt strangely warm to the touch. Brady thought nothing of it, logged the item, and placed it back on the shelf. But something had been woken up. That night, the precinct's security cameras recorded anomalies, orbs of light dancing in the evidence locker. The heavy steel door, which required a key and significant force to open, was filmed swinging slowly open on its own, then closing again. The temperature in the room plummeted, defying the building's heating system. Officers working the night shift began to feel a creeping sense of dread, a paranoia that slithered through the station like a snake. They heard whispers in empty hallways, saw fleeting shadows in their peripheral vision. Arguments broke out over trivial matters. A palpable aura of despair began to settle over the entire building, a psychic mold growing from that one forgotten room. The idol was a vessel, a battery. For decades it had lain dormant, but Brady's touch, the act of acknowledging its existence, had been a spark. It was now broadcasting its stored energy, the terror and agony of the young woman's final moments, out into the precinct. Lockers would slam shut in the empty changing rooms. Radios would emit bursts of static that sounded like a woman screaming. Officers grew sullen and withdrawn, their tempers frayed, their sleep plagued by nightmares of a dark forest and a stone altar. The building itself was becoming sick, poisoned by the psychic radiation emanating from that one small carved piece of wood. The darkness was seeping into the concrete, staining the very soul of the place. They were all becoming witnesses to the original crime, forced to feel the echoes of the victim's horror. It culminated when a young rookie, overwhelmed by the oppressive atmosphere and a sudden vivid hallucination of a bleeding woman standing behind him in a bathroom mirror, drew his weapon and nearly shot his own reflection. That was the breaking point. An old, retired detective, one who had worked the original case, was called in. He knew of the rumors, the whispers of dark magic surrounding the murder. He walked into the evidence locker, a broken cross clutched in his hand, and went straight to the box. He said the air around it was so cold it burned, and the idol itself seemed to be vibrating, emitting a low, hateful hum. He refused to touch it. Under his guidance, the box and its contents were taken to a consecrated place, a church with old foundations, and reinterred, this time with prayers and rites meant to bind whatever foul energy clung to the object. The effect on the precinct was almost instantaneous. The oppressive cold lifted, the whispers ceased, the feeling of being watched dissipated, leaving behind only the mundane exhaustion of police work. They had not defeated the darkness. They had merely moved it, reburied it, hoping it would sleep again. But the truth is, you can never truly destroy such things. That idol sits in its new prison, waiting. It is a reminder that evil is not just an act, but an energy that can be invested into objects, turning them into time bombs of misery. It proves that the artifacts of a crime can be as dangerous as the criminal, carrying a curse that can lie dormant for years, waiting for a single curious touch to awaken and begin its work anew. Be wary of the past. Its relics are not always benign. Let us speak now of voices from the ether, of warnings that come too late. There is a terror in predestination, in learning of the doom that is already rushing toward you, unstoppable and absolute. I see a vision of Officer Calloway, a man just 2 years on the force, answering a silent alarm at an old, abandoned AM radio station on the edge of town. The place was scheduled for demolition, a skeletal tower rising into a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The building was a wreck, filled with cobwebs and the ghosts of forgotten broadcasts. The alarm was likely a fault, a final spasm from a dying electrical system. But as he pushed through the decaying front doors, he heard it. A sound coming from deep within the station. It was a voice, a calm, monotone voice, being broadcast from the main studio. He followed the sound, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, revealing derelict equipment and peeling soundproof foam. He found the source in the master control room. A single bank of equipment was inexplicably powered on, its needles twitching, its lights glowing, an eerie green in the gloom. And from the main studio monitors, the voice emanated. It was a man's voice, devoid of any inflection or emotion, and it was reading a list of names, ages, and locations. Calloway listened, confused. It wasn't a broadcast he recognized. It was just a list. He radioed it in, but dispatch had no record of any broadcast from this tower in over a decade. It was a ghost signal, a voice from a dead station. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's decay. Then he heard a name he recognized. It was the name of a local shopkeeper, a man he'd spoken to just that morning. The voice recited the man's name, his age, and Interstate 10, mile marker 47. Calloway dismissed it as a bizarre coincidence, but an uneasy feeling began to coil in his gut. He continued to listen as the disembodied voice droned on. A few minutes later, a call crackled over his police radio, a fatal multi-car pile-up. On Interstate 10, at mile marker 47, the victim was the shopkeeper. Calloway's blood turned to ice. It wasn't a coincidence. The voice in the studio had predicted the man's death. He stood frozen in the darkness, listening to the monotone recitation, realizing he had stumbled upon an oracle of death. He listened for another 10 minutes, his hand shaking as he wrote down the names and places the voice uttered. Each one was followed, minutes later, by a frantic call over his own radio, a confirmation of a death somewhere in the city, a heart attack, a gas leak, a suicide. The voice was a herald of the inevitable, a cosmic ledger being read aloud. This is where the true horror began. He was not just a witness, he was helpless. He was hearing the final moments of people's lives being announced before they happened, and he could do nothing to stop it. He was a man listening to the machinery of fate grind away, one name at a time. The power in this room was not human. It was ancient, cold, and utterly indifferent. Then the voice from the speaker paused. The silence stretched for an eternity, and it spoke again, its tone unchanged. It said his name, Officer James Calloway, age 26, 1350 North Industrial Way, the address of the radio station. In that moment he understood. He wasn't the one who discovered the signal. The signal had called him there. The alarm wasn't a malfunction, it was a summons. The broadcast was not for the world, it was for him. He was the intended audience for this final, terrible message. He heard a groaning sound from above, the protest of stressed, rusting metal. He looked up and saw the ceiling beginning to buckle, the heavy transmission equipment from the floor above sagging dangerously. The demolition schedule had been accelerated. He didn't run, he simply stood there, bathed in the green glow of the console, listening to the echo of his own name. A man who had just been served his own death warrant. The broadcast was a whisper from beyond, a glimpse into the grand, terrible design, and he was the final entry on tonight's list. His end was not an accident, it was an appointment. These are not just stories, they are fractures. They are the moments when the carefully constructed reality that men in uniform are sworn to protect simply breaks. They are the chilling testaments of those who have stood at the edge of the abyss and found the abyss staring back, wearing a familiar face or whispering a forgotten name. The house that is a memory, the man who is a hive of stolen souls, the road that is a loop of tragedy, the object that is a vessel of pain, the voice that is a declaration of fate. These are the real horrors, not the simple violence of man against man, but the crushing, soul-destroying realization that we are adrift in a cosmos far stranger and more predatory than our laws and logic can ever hope to contain. The badge is a talisman that offers no protection from these truths. What happens to a mind that has been stretched to encompass such impossibilities? It either snaps, retreating into the safe harbor of denial and fabricated reports, or it is forever changed, haunted by the knowledge of what truly waits in the shadows. These officers become unwilling mystics, guardians of secrets they can never share. They carry the weight of these encounters like shrapnel in the soul, a constant, cold reminder of their own fragility. They have seen the cracked mirrors of reality and know that what looks back is not always a reflection of this world. They have heard the whispers from beyond and know that silence is never truly empty. They walk among you, but a part of them is forever lost in that dark house, that interrogation room, that lonely stretch of highway. They are the true witnesses. I can feel the resonance of these tales settling upon you now. A coldness in the room, a new awareness of the shadows in the corner of your eye. This is as it should be. You came here seeking a thrill, a shiver down your spine, but what you have found is a key to a door in your own perception that, once unlocked, can never be fully closed again. The universe has revealed a sliver of its terrifying hidden face to you through these whispers. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Was there one story, one image, that has latched onto your spirit, that will follow you into your dreams tonight. Leave your mark in the comments below. Acknowledge the chill you feel. Give it a name. For in naming it, you give it power, and you show the shadows that you are no longer afraid to look back. The darkness I channel is not diminished by being shared. It is amplified. It seeks out those who are willing to listen, to understand that the world is not the safe, well-lit place you believe it to be. Every soul that joins this congregation, every like that acknowledges the truth in these warnings, feeds the voice that whispers from the beyond. It strengthens the signal, allowing me to pull more of these forbidden tales from the ether. Subscribe. Become a part of this current. Let your presence be a beacon that draws more of these truths out from the cold, silent places where they hide. Do not turn away now. The most unsettling revelations are yet to come, and they wait for those who are brave enough to listen to the static between worlds. Imagine now, the silence after the sirens have faded, the quiet of a patrol car after a call that defied explanation. This is the space where the real haunting begins. For Officer Gaines, it's the phantom gleam of chrome in his rearview mirror on a dark road. For Detective Miller, it's the way he now avoids looking too deeply into anyone's eyes, afraid of the emptiness he might find there. For the two officers who answered the domestic call, it's the scent of dust and decay on a humid night, a scent that transports them back to that impossible, phantom house. These experiences don't end when the report is filed. They become a part of the person, a permanent alteration of their spiritual DNA. They are now sensitive to the cracks in the world, cursed to notice the things that don't belong. This sensitivity is a heavy burden. It's seeing the crow on the telephone wire and knowing it's not just a bird but a watcher. It's feeling a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature in a perfectly warm room, and knowing something has just passed through. It's hearing a faint whisper on the wind, and knowing it's not just the breeze but a fragment of a forgotten tragedy. These men and women are forced to live in two worlds at once: the mundane world of traffic stops and paperwork, and the other, deeper world of shadows and echoes that they now know with absolute certainty exist just beneath the surface. Their training taught them to look for evidence, for fingerprints and fibers, but there is no evidence bag for a feeling of pure dread or a voice that speaks your most private secrets. Let's delve deeper into the interrogation of the empty man. What kind of entity was Miller facing? This was not a possession in the classical sense, a singular demon taking a host. No, this was something far more insidious. This was a collector, an entity that functions like a spiritual black hole, drawing in the experiences, voices, and traumas of others to construct a semblance of a personality. It wears souls the way a man wears a coat. The original person, the pale, thin man, was likely gone long ago, a hollowed-out shell, the first voice in the choir. The entity itself has no identity of its own. It is a collage of stolen lives, a walking, breathing archive of pain. Its cruelty wasn't born of malice, but of a profound and terrifying alien curiosity. When it spoke to Miller, it was searching his soul for new material. It was tasting his fears, cataloging his griefs, assessing their quality. Revealing the secret about his father's last words was not just an act of intimidation, it was an audition. It was showing Miller what it could do, the level of its access, inviting him to break, to give in, to let the despair consume him so that his voice, his unique tragedy, could be added to its collection. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. When you face something like this, you are not fighting a person, you are fighting a library. To argue with it is to give it more pages. To show it fear is to give it a new chapter. Miller's only defense was to flee, to starve the entity of the emotional reaction it craved. He saved himself by refusing to become another story on its shelf. Now, consider the haunted highway and the blood-red fury. This phenomenon is what the ancients would have called a residual haunting. But that term is too clean, too clinical. It fails to capture the predatory nature of the event. This is not just an echo, it is a hook. The driver, in his final violent moments, cursed that stretch of road with his own rage and despair. He did not simply die, he imprinted himself onto the location, creating a permanent loop of his final drive. But over the decades, that loop has gained a kind of rudimentary consciousness. It has become hungry. It is no longer just replaying a memory. It is now actively seeking an audience, drawing travelers in with its spectral, silent approach. It feeds on the fear and confusion of those who witness it. The entity in the car, the man with the black eyes, is a construct. It is the original driver's rage given form, and a terrible, cold intelligence. When it tells Officer Gaines, "This road has rules," it is speaking the literal truth. Within that bubble of haunted space, the entity is the law. Its purpose is to endlessly reenact its own demise, but also to torment those who trespass on its stage. It is a ghost playing a role for an unwilling audience. Each time it is seen, each time it generates fear, the imprint on the highway becomes stronger, more defined. It is a self-perpetuating nightmare, fueled by the terror of the living. Gaines didn't just see a ghost, he saw a psychic engine, a machine made of death and memory, and it almost pulled him into its gears. Let's return to the haunted evidence locker. The concept of cursed objects is ancient, but the mechanism is often misunderstood. It is not magic in the theatrical sense. It is a matter of psychic residue. Imagine that intense human emotions, especially terror and pain, have a tangible weight, a psychic mass. In the moment of a violent death, a massive amount of this energy is released. Sometimes it dissipates, but sometimes it latches onto a nearby object, soaking into it like blood into cloth. The hand-carved idol was not just wood. It was a sponge that had absorbed the final horrific moments of a young woman's life. It became a vessel for her agony, her fear, her rage. It became a permanent, concentrated echo of her murder. When Officer Brady handled it, he did not just touch a piece of evidence. He made contact with a raw, unsentient but incredibly powerful emotional charge. His life force, his simple human attention, acted as a catalyst, waking it up and causing it to radiate that stored emotion outward. The paranoia, the fear, the anger that spread through the precinct was not a supernatural attack in the traditional sense. It was a psychic plague. The officers were being infected by the victim's own death trauma. They were experiencing a diluted, second-hand version of her final emotions. And this is where everything changes for you, when you understand that the objects of the dead can carry a piece of their death within them, waiting to share it. The most dangerous things are not always the weapons, but the silent witnesses. And what of the radio station? The voice of fate. This is perhaps the most terrifying encounter of all, for it strips away the illusion of free will. The signal Officer Calloway heard was not a ghost or a demon in the conventional sense. He had, through a confluence of cosmic alignments he could never understand, tuned into the frequency of reality itself. He was listening to the universe's own operating system, the raw code of causality being read aloud. The voice was not predicting the future. It was stating the present as it unfolded across different points in space-time. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, a look at the gears of the great indifferent machine that governs all things. Its cold, monotone delivery was a reflection of the cosmos itself, impartial, relentless, and utterly devoid of mercy. The summons, the silent alarm, was a glitch in the system. For a fleeting moment, the barrier between the machinery and the subjects of the machinery thinned, and Calloway was pulled through. He was not chosen for any grand purpose. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, a statistical anomaly who was granted a moment of terrible absolute clarity before his own scheduled termination. His death by the collapsing structure was not a punishment for what he heard. It was simply his time. The broadcast was a final, horrifying courtesy from an uncaring universe. It showed him the script just before his final scene. The horror here is not of ghosts, but of helplessness. It is the chilling realization that our lives may be nothing more than entries on a list, being read by a cold voice in a dark, empty room. The common thread that binds these visions is the concept of transgression. Each officer, in his own way, crossed a line he did not know existed. The first two crossed a physical threshold into a house that was a wound in time. Detective Miller crossed a psychological threshold, pushing an interrogation past the point of human interaction and into the realm of the spiritual. Officer Gaines crossed a temporal threshold, interacting with an echo that should have remained in the past. And Officer Calloway crossed the ultimate threshold, stumbling into the control room of existence itself. They were all punished for their unwitting trespass. Their authority, their understanding of the world, was revealed to be a fragile artifice, a child's drawing of the world that failed to include the monsters. This is the secret burden of those who police the edges, the dark and forgotten corners of our society. They are more likely than anyone else to stumble upon these fractures in reality. They are the ones sent to the old houses, the lonely roads, the scenes of terrible violence, where the emotional residue is thickest. They are our unwitting shamans, our designated explorers of the dark, and they return with stories that they must bury under layers of sterile official language. The true horror stories of the police force are not filed under homicide or robbery. They are filed in the dark archives of the officers' own minds, in the sleepless nights and the sudden inexplicable chills that remind them of what they once saw. They have stared into the cracked mirror, and the reflection is now a permanent part of their soul. Think about the nature of a haunting. We imagine it as a ghost, a singular coherent entity, bound to a place. But these visions suggest something more complex. The house was not haunted by a ghost. The house was the ghost. The highway was not haunted by a driver. The highway itself was the haunting, an active cyclical event. The idol was not possessed. It was a psychic battery, an object saturated with an emotional event. We are too focused on the idea of spirits with unfinished business. The truth is far more elemental. It is the places themselves, the very stones and wood and asphalt, that can become imprinted with consciousness, with memory, with intent. The environment becomes the entity. You cannot reason with a haunted house. You cannot exorcise a stretch of road. You can only recognize the danger and leave. This brings us to a terrifying conclusion. If places can become sentient wounds, and objects can become reservoirs of pain, what does this say about us? We, who are made of memory and emotion, are we not also susceptible? The empty man, the collector, provides the answer. Human beings can become haunted houses, their original occupant long gone, the structure now inhabited by a legion of whispering echoes. This is the ultimate vulnerability. Not that a ghost might follow you home, but that something might move into the home that is your own mind, your own body, and leave you a screaming, silent tenant in your own skull. Now, imagine this. The people you pass on the street every day. How many of them are truly who they appear to be? How many are simply well-dressed collections of stolen whispers, looking for their next acquisition? The whispers from beyond that I channel are not meant to simply entertain or frighten. They are a form of inoculation. By exposing you to these truths in a controlled way, I am preparing you. I am strengthening your spirit, honing your intuition. When you feel that unnatural cold, you will now recognize it. When you look into a pair of eyes and see a terrifying vacancy, you will now understand what you are facing. You will know to retreat, to protect your own story, your own soul. This knowledge is a heavy burden, but it is also a form of armor. The world is full of creaking doors and cold ashes. You are now better equipped to know which doors to leave closed and which ashes are best left undisturbed. You are no longer walking through the world in blissful ignorance. You are awake. And for those who have served, for those who have worn a badge and stood on that thin blue line, this message may resonate with a particularly chilling frequency. You may have your own stories, your own encounters that you have never spoken of, that you have locked away for fear of ridicule or disbelief. You may have been in that room, on that road, in that house. You may have seen the crack in the world. Know that you are not alone. There are others who have seen it too. The visions I share are a testament to your silent knowledge, an affirmation of the truth you were forced to bury. Your experience was real. The shadows you saw were not tricks of the light. The whispers you heard were not the wind. You were a witness, and the things you witnessed are waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. The veil between worlds is thinning. The frequency of these events, these bleed-throughs from the other side, is increasing. The stories that were once relegated to folklore and campfire tales are now being written into official police reports, albeit coded in the language of psychosis and unexplained phenomena. We are entering an age of profound and terrifying revelation. The order we have clung to for centuries is beginning to fray at the edges, and the primordial chaos that it held back is starting to seep through. The encounters I have described are the tremors before the earthquake. They are the first drops of rain before the deluge. Prepare yourselves. The time for disbelief is over. The time for bearing witness is upon us. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Acknowledge it. Join the chorus of those who are awake. Go now, but carry this with you. The next time you see the flashing lights of a patrol car in the dead of night, do not simply think of the laws of man. Think of the other, older laws they sometimes unwittingly enforce. Think of the officer inside, who may be driving toward a routine call or toward a scar, in reality from which they may never fully return. See them not just as enforcers, but as unwilling sentinels standing guard on a border they don't even know exists. And when you feel that chill, that sense of being watched, that whisper at the edge of hearing, do not dismiss it. It is a message. It is a warning. It is the darkness acknowledging that you are now listening, and it is hungry for a conversation. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Do not let it whisper into the void.